services, and I know there's probably a lot of that.
One thing that really made well about you is that I taken time out of an insane film.
If you grew up in a dysfunctional home, if you've gone through some hard knocks in life, if you got to the point in life where you were in so much pain that you didn't see a way out of it, you're going to love my guest on Unbeatable today. Ron Breland has all of those terrible experiences and many more that he just gets totally real and completely vulnerable with on this episode of Unbeatable. But what I love about this guy's story is he is not afraid to share his deepest, greatest moments of failure and fear, but he's also turned all of those around. And now he's using those things in his past to help others too. So strap in and hang on for Ron Breland, my guest on this episode of Unbeatable. Hey, before we get into the interview for this episode, I want to invite you to go with me on the trip of a lifetime. And that is not an exaggeration. I've spent more than the last year building a tour of the Holy Land that never existed before. This is what we're calling the Unbeatable Adventure, where we're going to rappel, we're going to climb cliffs, we're going to ride mountain bikes through the countryside, we're going to swim in the Dead Sea, we're going to climb trails, we're going to spend nights under the stars and spend days in luxury hotel rooms. We'll be in fishing boats on the Sea of Galilee. This is basically everything that you could want to do with action and adventure in Israel, plus all of the world's great historical sites there. And the dates for this trip are March 17th through the 27th. I want to invite you to come along. We built this trip so no matter where you live in the world, all you need to do is buy plane tickets and show up in Israel on day one. And from there, we pay for and we take care of everything. Hey, if this epic tour sounds like something you're interested in, why don't you go over to Signature Tours and search for the Unbeatable Holy Land Adventure with Jeff Strucker. Starts March 17th and it runs until the 27th. I would love to see you there with me.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.
Hey, Ron, thank you for taking some time out of a brand new year in 2024 to be my guest on Unbeatable today.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It's an honor to be here. Really been looking forward to it.
Yeah, man, I started looking over your background and you and I have a ton of stuff in common. We're just going to go down memory lane for a lot of this episode today. Sound good?
Let's do it. Sure.
I always do this for guests that have served in the military or law enforcement. Man, I want to first, before we do anything else, tell you thank you for all that you've done for our country in the military. Thanks for your service to your community as a firefighter and, all that you continue to do.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much appreciate the support. It really means a lot. And you know that as well. And thank you for your service as well, Jeff. I can't thank you enough.
Man. So you are a third generation firefighter. Tell me a little bit about life growing up with your, in a firefighter home before you end up in the military.
Well, actually, I grew up in a very dysfunctional alcoholic home and tossed around a lot. But peppered throughout my childhood were these visits to the fire station where my grandfather was the fire chief. So, of course, when the chief's grandson walks in, you get the red carpet treatment and you get, pretty much free reign at the station. And that's kind of where it bit. And then it just took from there. And I saw how much the love of service from these guys and the family element that they had, that was really appealing to me because it's something I didn't have.
Yeah. Well, anybody who's watching this episode on YouTube can see behind you all of the firefighter patches, all of the military stuff that you have on the wall. Obviously, man, you love the service to the country, service to the community, or else you wouldn't have those kind of things on your wall behind you.
I love them all.
Um,
God bless them all.
Listen, man, a big part of your story is how severe the abuse was. There's lots of people listening that had a really rough childhood, but yours was pretty severe. Can you describe a little bit about what life was like with your stepdad, especially before you left home? Actually, I should say before he kind of kicked you out on the streets.
Yeah, before I PCS'd out of there, you could say.
That's right, before you.
Yeah. I was TDY homeless for a year, but before that, there was one incident that that actually strikes the biblical chord with me now. It didn't then, of course, because I didn't have the knowledge I have now. But there was one night that he had me standing basically at the position of attention in the kitchen, and he would ask me a question over and over again, and I was telling the truth, and I wouldn't deviate from my answer. And every time I said no, he slapped me in the face, and he alternated cheeks until he slapped me about 50 times that night. I couldn't even feel my face at the end of the night.
Uh-huh.
And it sounds a little tongue in cheek to say turning the other cheek, but at this point in my life, I can say that I've actually forgiven that man, and I pray for that man. Because as much pain as he was inflicting, I've gone through some things myself. I can't imagine the internal conflict and fire that he was undergoing at the time. You know what I mean? And alcohol, of course, exacerbates everything. And it made me see that if it was possible to be this bad, it might just be possible to be this good. And I don't know what that looks like, but if I avoid the mistakes that I've seen, I mean, I'm bound to get it right 50% of the time. I mean, I was just going with the odds. But it was tough. It was a tough time. And, I think God had me there for a reason. I really do. I'll never deviate from that either. I believe everything we do is a divine appointment. And when you look at things through that lens, it really does change everything.
Yeah, agreed. A lot of guys and gals that have been through what you've been through, the hurt and the abuse, and the torment at home or, with a parent, they're going to be angry and hang on to hatred for a long time.
Yes.
And just hearing you say that you got to the point where you were able to forgive him, that's a really big step. I want to know what drove you to the military, because more than a few of my buddies in the military, they went to the military to get out of a home where dad was highly volatile, very violent, a mean drunk. Let's just use that language. And
Absolutely.
for them, the army was their way out. And those guys and gals became great warriors, but they also had a lot of mean inside them because of their upbringing. So what brought you to the military recruiter's office?
Well, I had seen that family model through not so much the fire station, but through my dad. He was a Vietnam veteran. He's a Marine. God forgive him. He's a Marine. But he would have his buddies over late into the night, and these guys would stay up telling stories and, reminiscing, and a lot of drinking going on. And I remember sometimes as a kid, I'd wake up and they'd be stacked up on the floor, just like they were in the jungles of Vietnam 10 years prior to that. And when I saw that, it wasn't something strange to me. It was, that's blood. That's family right there. That's what love looks like right there. And it really struck that chord with me. And my dad went on to become a police officer as well, which really kind of irritated my grandfather. But, being a fire chief.
Sure.
But
Being a fire chief, yep.
when you want to tick off the old man, that's what you do. But I think everybody has these experiences for a reason, and it's to come out stronger on the other end.
Yeah. You said you had to learn how to turn the other cheek, literally, when your stepfather was abusing you. I'm saying lots of gals that got beat, physically abused or emotionally abused when they were at home, they join the military, and whether they know it or not, they just want to unleash that hatred on the enemy.
Right.
So they become pretty impressive warriors, but there's also something very dark and maybe very unhealthy inside them.
Right.
So I'm just wondering, like, what was it that
I
brought
think
you?
the military looks for that in a lot of ways. I think they see a population of eligible males and, who don't really seem to have a lot else going on for them. And I mean, look at me, I was homeless. And to me, the Army was 3 hots and a cot, my first suit, a family, and 23 million brothers and sisters. So, I mean, really, it was a win-win for me.
Yeah. I love how you described it as family. That's very much what it was for me too. Like, I didn't even know that's what it was until it became a deep and a very close family. And to this day, some of my friends in the military are closer to me than the people that are blood relation because of all we went through together. You've been through more than a few things in the military. I had no idea until I started researching a little bit about you, Ron, that you and I were in Somalia at the same time. Not only that, but there is no question there was more than a few times that I came to visit you over in Mogadishu at a sword base to do a logistics resupply. So let's talk about, early time in the military leading up to and then going to Somalia. Describe that a little bit for us, will you?
Well, I joined the military in November of '90 on the eve of Desert Storm. And like a lot of young American males, I was not about to take another bully in my life on the international stage or in my face.
Yeah.
It wasn't going to happen.
Saddam Hussein bully around the country of Kuwait, right?
It really got under my skin. And of course, every recruiter in the country was just like, come on, bring him in.
Yeah.
And my recruiter was a paratrooper, and he hook, line, and sinker just locked me in. And when I got to Fort Campbell, I got through training. I got to Fort Campbell. The DoD Fire Academy used to be at Chanute Air Force Base in Rantoul, Illinois, which is now closed down. It's now in San Angelo, Texas, down there at Goodfellow Air Force Base. And it's the joint school. All the branches go there. It was not always like this. So that was something new to me too, going to a joint service academy. But then I got to Fort Campbell, and I remember seeing this sign on the wall that said "Rendezvous with Destiny." And Jeff, I got to tell you, it punched me right in the heart. I was like, yes.
Rendezvous with Destiny. I love it. Yep.
I was destined to be here. This is what was supposed to happen. And I got to my unit. I found out we were a small 6-man team. In the firefighter world, there are TRADOC firefighters and there's FORCECOM firefighters.
Yeah, and
TRADOC
let me
guys
break in for a second. I'll explain this to the listener. The guys that are back at U.S. bases, and then there are the guys that are in units that are going to deploy all over the world. That's the difference that he's talking about right now.
Yes, sir. Well, I didn't realize it, but we were on the FORCECOM side. So our 6-man team was eligible. We were able to take a fire engine, a Humvee, and a little ISU 90 container, stick it in a C5, wheels up in 18 hours, and be gone. And we would go after you guys took an airfield. We're supposed to land and be able to set up shop so we can bring the aircraft in.
Yeah. Right.
So it's very much a hand-in-hand operation here, but we're kind of waiting. Everything's contingent on you guys, to give us the green light. We had one of our firefighters on the plane going to Panama before the 82nd got turned around. I mean,
Yeah.
they're not playing around. They'll insert guys in very unique little scenarios, and the schoolhouse doesn't really deal with that stuff. They don't even tell you about that stuff most of the time, because once you get out into the the working side of things, and we hadn't gone anywhere for a while. We lost to the General Keene's desk. Made it on the bird instead of my fire truck, so we didn't get to go to Desert Storm.
Oh my goodness, this is crazy.
Did you
Put
not?
my desk, kick that fire engine off of the
Get
airplane.
that big
and put
yellow
my
truck
desk
off
on
the
there.
plane, right? Yeah.
Because my
Well,
desk is a lot more important than putting out an aircraft fire on a flight line.
I mean, what's an aircraft cost? We'll just make more. But then, so my unit was a little disgruntled about that, you might say, and I'm like, well, I'm gonna find a way. I'm gonna get a tour. I'm gonna find a way. So Somalia kicks up, and I hear the scuttlebutt around battalion that they want drivers for some reason. They need drivers to volunteer, logistics run. You're gonna feed these starving children you've heard about your whole life from your mother, and you're gonna be the one to make a difference. Solid. I can drive a fire engine. I can drive a Humvee. Let's go. So I tell my sergeant at the fire station, there's only 3 of us on duty at the time, an E4, 2 E4s, me and another guy, and an E5. And he was in a brown recliner, kicked back watching TV. And I said, hey, Sarge, I'm going to call battalion and volunteer to go to Africa. He says, yeah, go ahead. Wrong answer with me.
Yeah. He didn't really buy it, right?
He didn't think it was going to happen, and that was the biggest E4 Mafia moment of my life, because battalion patched me through to the sergeant major at home. Well, now the hackles on my neck are going up because this can't be good.
Yeah, sure.
So the sergeant major says, I'll call you in the morning, and the next morning came, and right as I'm about to get my butt chewed by the first sergeant, his phone rings, tells him, get Breland down to battalion, he's going to Africa. Done. And crisis averted, and off to Africa we went. But I didn't go as a firefighter. I was basically a generic soldier over there. And there were 68 of us from Fort Campbell that nobody ever hears about. Because you hear about the range, you hear about 10th Mountain, but it was the 227th GS company, a general supply company. I don't even know if they have those anymore, out of Fort Campbell. And they stuck us at Sword Base. And that's when I learned about mortar fire and how fun indirect fire can be.
Oh, yeah.
And for the first 30 days, it was just the gunpowder in your nose. You'd smell it and it would just burn. And it was just, it was just rough, and constantly, the alarm would go off and code words. If the Rangers swoop in, put your gear on, kill anything that comes through the door. And we're like, good Lord, this is not feeding the starving children, and we knew about a deed, we'd heard there was bad guys out there and whatnot. And I knew a lot of stuff afterwards, after the mission. After I got home, I found out a lot of stuff from, he used to be the sergeant major of the 160th. My gosh, can't remember his name. Sergeant major. His name was Bob. He was my former father-in-law's next door neighbor.
We'll just call him Bob. How about
that? He went to every single one of those memorial services.
Yeah.
After everybody got home, and I saw that, and that was one of the biggest impactful moments of leadership I ever saw in the Army.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because of his kindness and his genuineness and the depth of his love for these men. And it just reinforced that for the rest of my career. Somalia was definitely a defining time.
Sure. Let me kind of paint that picture for the listeners a little bit. Mogadishu is the capital city of Somalia, but by the time late 1992, early 93, that there's United Nations missions going on in the country to hand out food to starving children. Just like Ron said, almost every mother in the world said, you need to eat your dinner because there are children starving in Africa. And there literally were children starving in Africa. Most of the United Nations set up a couple of bases around the city. Now, the city of Mogadishu is not very big. By world capital standards, it's extremely small, highly densely populated, and incredibly violent. So you have pockets of United Nations forces and U.S. supply forces all over the capital city. I had the mission of going and getting supplies for the whole task force because my guys were on vehicles. So I drove around the city virtually every other day, going to Sword Base, going to the United Nations compounds, going to other supply compounds. And I would walk in there with special operations equipment, carrying weapons that nobody's ever seen before. In fact, I remember going to Sword Base and somebody stopped me and said, what is that you're carrying, Sergeant? And I said, what do you mean? And they were like, that weapon that you're carrying. I said, it's a shotgun, man. Have you never seen a shotgun before? And they're like, I didn't know that we gave shotguns to the military. I thought that those were just for hunters. I was carrying a shotgun because I had some rubber pellet and beanbag rounds in there to thin the crowds out if they were coming our way. Anyway.
Those are attitude adjusters. That's right.
Yeah. I thought it was funny that some of the equipment that we were carrying had never been seen before. But throughout the whole time that I was in Somalia, I watched those United Nations or U.S. bases all around the city come under fire, and yours comes under fire. So describe what happened when you're at Sword Base and you get attacked.
Well, like I said, for the first 30 days, there's that left seat, right seat ride with the unit that's there and the incoming unit. And, they're kind of explaining how things work. And I was told I'd never leave the base. They're like, you're the extra guy. You're the fireman. You're never leaving. You're going to be right. You're going to be the talk guy.
You're going to go get coffee for people. Basically, yeah, that's what you're going to do. Yeah.
Well, Fort Campbell sent us over there with a butter bar and an E7. That was our leadership cast.
Yeah. Wow.
So it was pretty amazing. But I'll tell you what, to watch those guys grow as leaders, because they had to, especially our LT, he had to grow fast. And he did. And it was amazing. But the indirect fire stuff didn't really, I want to say it was like, hey, if it's your time, it's your time. We all say that, that's right? Yeah, sure. And if it's and that's true. And if it's absolutely true, because God has a plan. If it's now, it's now. But like being on guard, things like having elevated positions that were silhouetted both day and night, not smart. Okay, let's not do that. Or there was a truck explosion. That I guess the timer was set to go in. They were going to go. It was a honey truck. You know what those are. One of the indigenous trucks would come in to maintain our latrines, and I guess the timer was set wrong, and they actually finished their run and got outside the camp, and then it blew.
Then it blew up.
So everything hit the fan, but not the right fan.
Literally a truckload of human waste from the porta potties blows up. You can imagine what that smell and sight looked like. Thank God that went off outside the camp.
Yeah, when my wife blames me for after dinner activities, I'm like, you don't even know. Okay, you have no right to complain here. But we that one explosion though, it knocked me 12 feet, and I'll never forget, I was saluting an officer with my rifle, and I got to the full position upright, and that's when I remember opening my eyes, still in the same position on my back. And I wasn't where I was standing when I was. And this captain, he comes up to me, he says, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, are you?" I mean, I don't even know what's going on right now. And I had gotten a TBI, and nobody knew what that was back then. Nobody was even
Nobody would
talking
even
about
use that phrase. Right. Sure.
nobody was talking about PTS either, because it was only in the DSM for like 5 years at that point. So it hadn't really spread out to the community. And back then, you didn't say if you had an issue of any kind, because that was a death sentence to your career. And this was only 2 years in the Army when this happened. And I never figured out what was going on. I couldn't figure out why I couldn't comprehend certain things, why certain gears were slipping, relationships run afoul, just a marriage that circled the drain. Now, to her credit, I did marry the first sergeant's daughter. Not the best move on my part, Jeff. Okay. That's where leadership could have come in real handy a little sooner.
Yeah.
But again, God has a plan.
Yeah.
And, God turned my rendezvous with destiny into a rendezvous with eternity. And he used my wife to introduce me to Jesus after all of this mess that I threw myself out in the world, and I said, okay, God, if you're real, show me. And I kept getting hit, and I kept getting hit, and I kept getting hit, but I didn't have any guidance. And we tell troops all the time that you don't know what you don't know until you know. Well,
Yeah.
you don't know what you're not taught. And if you didn't have that guidance, I had a broken home. My kids had a broken home. I'm still repairing damages from those years, but I have the hope that they'll be with me and Jesus for eternity one day. And that's bigger than anything here.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank God for Helen and her influence. And I'm using very literal language right now. Thank God for Helen and
Yes.
her influence over you. Of course, you're going to be a little bit fractured emotionally growing up in a highly abusive home. And
Mhm.
then TBI, a traumatic brain injury after being blown 12 feet off of the ground in an explosion. Yeah, your brain's going to rattle around inside the skull, and you're going to start to forget things. You're going to start to have some moments where things are fuzzy. And a lot of guys and gals that have gone through that, they can't keep a solid relationship anymore because they're really not thinking straight, and they make some very stupid decisions.
Correct.
This, for a lot of people today, that kind of exposure, those kind of incidents would have ended your career. You do a lot more after that. Let's fast forward, because there's so much of your story that I just don't have time to cover. Let's fast forward to Kosovo a few years later, and you're over there serving in Kosovo. And when you have a chance to see a special forces team basically get blown up, and would you describe a little bit about your tour in Kosovo, but about how that special forces team incident impacted you?
Kosovo, we got the mission. I was at Fort Bragg when we got the mission to go to Kosovo. Again, I was with another team. This is the Fighting 89th, which is
All
now,
right.
now deactivated. But we were the Fighting 89th out of Fort Bragg, the only airborne firefighters in the Army. And I was the last airborne firefighter in the Army on jump status, actually.
All right.
So
Yeah.
I have the distinction of having that and 50 cents be worth a cup of coffee and maybe a board question. But other than that, not much.
The Fighting 89th. I love it. Let's parachute those firefighters right into combat.
Well, that's where I got my call sign from the CG over there. He said, well, you guys are airborne firefighters, and you're going to be the smoke jumper element. So that's when I became Smoke Jumper 7. And that was pretty cool. But we were responding, of course, to the genocide in Kosovo from Milosevic. Putin had just taken power a year before. And I chose my words carefully there, taken power. Milosevic was pretty much a nasty henchman that committed genocide. And, I just want to say that when we hear the word genocide, we hear it thrown around so flippantly throughout the media these days. And if I could, Jeff, I would really caution anyone before they even use that word, or any word really, to think about it. Because for those of us who have seen true genocide, it is not something to be thrown around lightly. It is not to be spoken of or used as a political broadsword. It is nasty. It is horrible, and it's preventable. So, but with that, we responded to this team. We heard that there was an explosion. This guy had backed his vehicle in, and he had just missed, I guess, these two anti-tank stacked mines with his right tire. And when he pulled out in the morning, he pulled out to the right. And I had to choose two guys to go with me because there were 6 of us. And I chose my guys from Bragg because it was our mission. The Army wasn't even backfilling my team anymore. I had 3 guys out of 6. So they backfilled out of Campbell, my old team. My idea, because they didn't know what to do. I said, well, I know I can find some firemen. You just need to cut them orders. And we were at Bragg, which has 18th Airborne Corps. So that was a very simple transaction. Unfortunately, it changed some lives that day by going over there. But I think for the better in a lot of ways, because we got to do a lot of good. We got to work with local firefighters. They have more of a military structure. Their head firefighter is like a general type cast for the country. And it's more of an admin position, but he and I got to talk a lot, and we got to do some joint operations, this was going to be our last mission. And I knew it. So I said, we're going out with a bang, fellas. We're doing everything we can possibly do. And I don't care if it's on the mission scope, we're doing it. And we did. And it was fantastic. And the guys performed beautifully. And my grandfather didn't make it to alive to see me make fire chief, but I know he's looking down with a little bit of pride, I hope, saying because we had 3 camps over 2 different countries, and we thought it was going to be a logistical nightmare, and it was to a degree, but it was a lot smoother because of the people we had. Yeah, people make a difference. They will make or break.
Make the difference. Yeah, sure. All right, now let's fast forward a lot and go to the Triangle of Death, 2003, 2004 in Ramadi. I spent a lot of time over there in that triangle myself. What were you doing over there at that time?
Well, I had reclassed. Now, by now, my career had taken a very serious detour because my TBI, and you can attest to this, I failed BNOC twice.
Wow.
This would have been an automatic career ender to anybody. Yeah.
Let me explain that to the audience. This is the mid-level NCO education course. You got to pass this. Your career, everything is riding on passing this. And it's unheard of for somebody to fail it once and get a second shot, let alone to fail it twice. So, yeah, that's a really career-altering moment.
Right. So I had left. I had to leave the fire service because I couldn't get promoted. And there are, I think at the time there were 7 E7s, 43 E6s, and maybe 60 or 70 E5s and a bunch of Joes. And that's it. No E8s or 9s in the MOS, no officers. So it's a very, very unique MOS that way, but it's very small. I used to tell my SF buddies, we're more special than special forces. And, I'm
sure they'd love to hear that from you. Yeah,
they do. While they're out stacking countries, But it was really cool because in the Sunni Triangle, I had reclassed then to NBC, nuclear, biological, chemical, or if you're a soldier, nobody cares because nobody cares until it matters, right?
That's right. Until they set one off, and then everybody's like, "Man, I wish I would have paid attention during this training." Right.
I'm like, I can't get my suit on fast enough, but then they do, and it was a wise move actually because I'd spoken to Helen about it, and my strong point in the fire service, I specialized in hazmat, so I was already into wearing the moon suits and doing all that stuff, and I was teaching some of it, so I reclassed to NBC, and it was a very natural fit in a post 9/11 world. And it set me up for when I did get medically retired to transition into a civilian career into emergency management, which I didn't see at the time, of course, but, you know, back to Iraq, I was with a decon platoon, and we had there's 4 areas of NBC: recon, decon, smoke, and flame. They still set fires with, JP8 and MOGAS and all that stuff. And they still have the smoke units to create, concealment. They do some really cool stuff nowadays. It's now called CBRN, Chem Biorad Nuke Explosive. But because they've really stepped it up a notch, especially after 9/11. But it really got me into teaching, because they say those who can do and those who can't teach. So I said, well, there's a lot of truth to that. And I got a lot up here that I can't use anymore. I may as well spread the wealth. Can't take it with me. And I did not find my faith until after my 3rd combat tour. Jeff, I was rolling the dice like no one I can't even imagine. I don't even know anybody that took the chances I took. I thought I was the captain of my own ship, and guess what? Every time I drove, it ran aground.
You crashed it, yeah. Yep.
Amen. Every time.
Plenty of people listening that can resonate with that. They're saying, yep, I've been there and still there right now myself. Sure. Listen, man, you're in all of the hot spots in Somalia, basically the only combat action going on in 93. You're in Bosnia and Kosovo, right in the thick of it, in 96, 97. You're in the middle of the Sunni Triangle, as violent and as dangerous. And I'm using hot spots now as a play on words. You're in all of the hot spots as a firefighter and as a chemical, biological, nuclear NCO in the Army for a long time. And you get a lot of enemy fire. You get a lot of, tossed around by the concussions that went off around you. And not just TBI, but let's just get real for a little bit about PTS, what it is and how it impacted you, how it impacts others, and why, when you and I were new in the military, this was, first of all, the phrase didn't exist. But even when it did exist, nobody wanted to use it. Nobody wanted to talk about it because of how detrimental it was to your future in the military. So
it was the stigma.
Why don't you just talk us through this?
I think back in those days, and I always feel like I'm turning into my dad when I say things like that, Jeff. But back in those days when you and I were young Joes, it was a different military then. It really was. And I don't say that as the aging vet. I say that because it's true. There were certain things you didn't talk about because that would draw negative attention to your career. And it was a career ender. It was the kiss of death. If you had to go see the shrink, because then there was the scuttlebutt and the talk. And a lot of it was just pride. It was just fear of the unknown.
In some of the circles I ran into, you were putting your security clearance at risk if you had to go sit down and talk with a psychiatrist. And so, man, people just avoided it like the bubonic plague, but it didn't make it non-existent. It didn't mean that it wasn't there. You just didn't talk about it. Sorry, go ahead. Well,
a lot of guys I know would pacify it with alcohol, drugs, gambling, women, you name it, all the vices. I didn't choose any of those. Mine was the worst of all the vices. Mine was the one that got Satan himself kicked out of heaven. Mine was pride.
Pride. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I died on that pride hill. I don't know how many times. And God brought me back and said, how many times do you want to hit your head against this wall, Ron? I mean, you can do it again. I'm going to love you again, but you really don't have to. And it's just, it brought me to a place where I became suicidal.
Yeah.
And I locked myself in a room for 3 days. And my daughter was on one side of a door, and my wife was on the outside of this garage door. And They did not leave me for 3 days, Jeff.
Wow.
And I had a pistol in my mouth. Yeah, I was ready. I had already made that decision. So, and for people who don't understand it, when you make that decision, everything else is now behind you. You're not thinking about the people you love. You're not thinking about family. Right. It's all fog. You're not thinking about any of that. And I realized I had like this revelation that in about 3 seconds, I'm going to meet my maker, and I'm going to have to justify how, with the incredible loving infrastructure of a family he's given me, and my wife and my 5 wonderful children and my 5 beautiful grandbabies and 23 million brothers and sisters, how with all of this and everything he's got me through, the gratitude that I would not be showing by this, just the sheer arrogance of it. Not even I could sell myself on my pride at that level. And I shot my pride dead where it stood, because something had to die that day, and it was going to be my pride. And it's the best decision I ever made.
Wow. You're blowing my mind right now, Ron. This is fascinating. I was just thinking when you were talking, if you want to know what real love looks like, it's a daughter that's on one door and a wife that's on the other door, and they're not leaving you for 3 days while you're going through a really dark, maybe one of the darkest moments of your life. And instead of thinking about themselves, they're thinking about you. But very few guys or gals that are at this point, when you got the pistol in your mouth, you basically settled in your mind what you're going to do next.
You're there.
Very few people ever turn back from that moment. Some do,
Right.
Very, very few do. And the few that turn back from that moment, most of them turn back because they're scared. So as you're talking, I'm fascinated now about why you're thinking through taking your own life this way, and how selfish it would be, in spite of everything that you've been given, to pull the trigger when it's most people that are going through that kind of pain. All that they want to do is make the pain stop, and pulling the trigger, although it is you can't come back from this incident, it's the only thing that they can rationalize that's going to make the pain stop. It's never right, but you can understand why they get to that point.
They get into a corner. You're painted into a corner, and it's a dark corner, and it's so dark you can't see any way out.
Man, we're going to camp here, Ron, because there are some people who are in a really dark place right now. They're listening to this episode. And to be honest, I don't even know who they are, but there are some that are driving. They're sitting there listening to this or watching this, and they're saying, I'm really close to doing the same thing. So, Ron, I need you to help them understand how one of two things we're going to die today. Either I'm going to actually pull the trigger, or something inside of me that makes me want to pull the trigger is going to have to die. Both of these things can't survive. So
they can't exist in the same place. No.
Yeah. Can you give us a little bit more? I need a little bit more detail from you now, just for that person that's in a very similar place.
Jeff, I had a .357 in my mouth. I had my thumb on the trigger. It was tickling the back of my throat. It was real. You know the smell of metal from going to the range and being close. You know the smell of steel, and it was just that familiarity that hit me like a brick, and it reminded me of days on the range, which was actually a better time than where I was currently at. And ironically, I had a weapon in my hand then too, but I wasn't thinking like this.
Yeah. It was pointed the right direction instead of at you. Yeah.
But, and I don't see any of this to make light of it, not in the slightest, because for the person who's listening, it's even remotely thinking about this. I can't tell you how not the right decision this is. I can't tell you how much you are loved, how much I love you. And I don't even know you. But I do know you, because I know where you're at, and I've been where you've been, and I felt what you felt.
Okay.
And I'm telling you now that there is one way out of all of this that will give you a peace that defies understanding. The pain that defies understanding can only be overcome by a light that shines through all that darkness and defies all of that understanding. And it's found, it's found right here, Jeff. It's found right here. I used to say all the time when I was younger, was there like a manual that I didn't get or something? Like when I was homeless, like, did all the other kids get this when they grew up? And yeah, there is a manual for raising kids. It's right here. There's a manual for marriage.
Bible.
It's right here. That's right.
Sure.
There's a manual for leadership. It's right here. And I'm telling you, and I was afraid that if I picked up that book, I was going to be accountable for everything that was inside of it. And guess what?
Wow.
I already was. I already was.
Yeah.
Picking up that book was the heaviest lift I ever made in my life. More than any day in the gym, Jeff.
Wow. Yeah, Ron is describing somebody who knows what that pain feels like because he's in the garden, Jesus, before he gets ready to sacrifice his life, literally to give himself over to his enemies and freely give his life up. He's wrestling with his own death. And according to the Bible, it is so agonizing for him that he is sweating like drops of blood because of the pain and the agony that he's going through. If you want to know, does he know what it feels like? He knows it to the infinite degree.
To the molecule, he knows. Absolutely.
So,
and I'll tell you what, Jeff, if somebody's thinking about it, the best thing you can do is not be alone. You have to reach out. Because people, right. I promise you, people will reach back. They will. Exactly right.
If
I told myself, I'm not worthy of it. God doesn't love me. I've outsinned God's love. Guess what? Can't happen. Can't happen. You know? And I believe those lies too. I believed them for the longest time. I used to be ashamed. Oh, I found my faith in my 40s. Oh, what a dirtbag. I can't believe I screwed up so much. Guess what? That's God's plan.
There's no bad time. Yeah.
There's no bad time. No, never.
Ron is right. If you're there right now, you reach out to one or two people and tell them how serious this is. And I assure you, somebody is going to step up and say, all right, let me help you let me help you find the help you need. If you are just that open, the problem is that guys or gals that get to the point that Ron got to, they shut themselves off to everybody in the world. And although there are people that want to help, they can't help. They either don't know, you haven't let them know, or you push them away when they try to help. And if you will reach out, people will show up and they will help out, but you got to let your guard down. So Ron, I'm going back to this statement that you made. Your pride had to die that day. How did your pride die that day? What did it look like for your pride to finally die that day that you had this 357 in the mouth?
Well, I had this daddy-daughter project that we used to do. We used to make these bracelets out of paracord. And I'm sure you've seen them. And we make very custom pieces. And we use it as a part of our ministry. But back then it was a daddy-daughter thing. We're like, we're making a little extra cash for our daughter. It's not really a business or anything. I turned it into that. I drove it into the ground, made my daughter hate it, completely ruined the experience. Right. I'm like, here, look at this.
Like any good paratrooper firefighter would.
That's right.
Everything to the extreme. Sure.
Look at this shiny thing here. Now I'm going to set it on fire for you. You know, that's exactly what happened. And I went and had my near suicide experience, and I spent 3 years off of social media. Jeff, people thought I was dead. Some of them, I still get calls like, "Hey man, I thought you checked out like 10 years ago." I'm like, "Nope, still here. Sorry to disappoint." But you know, I'm still kicking. But I went out into that shop after I came out of that garage, after dinner that night with the family, a very quiet dinner. Everybody was like, let's just see how this goes, because it's a pretty extreme day in the house, you know. And I just said, I love you all. I'm going to excuse myself for a bit. I'm going to go out in the shop, and I just need some time with God. And I said, I have spent a decade doing this. I have spent more money than I should have, more time away from my family than I should have. God, I've burned this thing into the ground and crashed it like no other. If you don't ever want me to tie another knot again, my carpal tunnel and my partially paralyzed right arm will be more than appreciative. That's not what happened. I said, God, if you do want me to do it, I'm going to do it all for you. You will be in every piece of this. Every piece will be a sermon for one. And I will spend the rest of my days trying to reach people for you. And instantly, I started getting inspired. I do a little bit. Some people have called me a military artist. I don't know. Some people call me the bracelet guy. Just don't call me late for supper. Okay, that's all. That's all I care about. But like this one here, Jeff, for example, this one here is actually for you, sir. This has. We have never done a live search and recognition mission before, and this is what we do. We search and recognize people who have done work for the veteran and first responder community on active service, and then have gone further to serve their communities, and this includes you. The 4 strands are the 4 colors of the Ranger Regiment insignia. The 4 strands also represent the 4 books of the gospel. Now, this braid is called the Armor of God braid because of the 4 strands, right? Now, it's really tight, and you'll see why, and it's got the Ranger skull on there. But what it does is it's a reminder. So if it's on your gear shift or your wrist or your nightstand, it's a reminder that, hey, you know what? Some kooky guy, paratrooping firefighter out in Arizona loves me for some reason.
Yeah.
And he's thinking about me. And now what I've done is I've created a connection, whether I've ever met them in person or not.
Right. Yeah.
And God puts a conduit in between us to where you can't say I didn't reach out to you. So if I hear that you tried to do something, I'm going to have some words for you because it's personal now. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not, and I don't shy away from that, and because you can't, because lives are too important to mess around with. And to date, we've made over 20,300 pieces so far, all by hand, all one of a kind, because every one is a sermon for one. And I haven't met half these people, Jeff, but they know God loves them. At least they've been told,
I love this language. 20,300 individual bracelets, and every one of them are unique because you're making them for one person and to make a difference. You're already answering the next question I was going to ask you, Ron. Like, you took a very dark, very ugly moment of your life, and not only did you get past it, but you are now using it to take care of other people. Would you describe what you're doing with ministry outreach, military ministry outreach, or military outreach ministry, and the Warfighter Ranch?
Well, Warfighter Ranch actually came to my wife. God gave that to my wife one night, and about 2:30 in the morning, she woke me up and said, "Go get me a notebook." And I'm like, "What? Okay,
totally
all right."
Random at 2:30 in the morning.
I mean, I wasn't, sleeping or anything, but okay, whatever.
Sure.
And she proceeded to go for the next 5-6 hours writing out detailed, like, what Warfighter Ranch is going to look like. And we obviously don't have it yet, but when God gives us the property, the ranch, we're going to bring warfighters in for a month. So you can call it residence, whatever, but don't call it a retreat, because it certainly isn't that. There's too many Band-Aid.
Not a retreat, right?
There's too many Band-Aid programs out there that are, make you feel good for a weekend. You go home and nothing's been achieved. That's not what we want to do. We want to bring the veterans in for 3 weeks and show them the biblical model of manhood and what that looks like, because most of them that I've talked to have never been taught, Jeff. I wasn't taught. So we're going to go through, the Ephesians 5 man, and then and Helen simultaneously is going to be working with her team with the spouses about what a Proverbs 31 woman looks like. And then when you get into that marriage, we're going to bring the family in for the final week and introduce them to the new biblical husband and wife. Yeah. And this, because the divorce rate with the combat veteran community is 80% or more. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's off the charts.
And if any other community had that, they would be jumping through the roof to fix it. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help that and bring veterans to Christ and help marriages. Their kids too.
You really have demonstrated what it looks like to go from turn the other cheek to helping guys and gals get healthy that have been really beat up by life or by war. How much land do you need in order to start Warfighter Ranch? Like, to start with, how much would you need?
Well, if I was president and had my way, Helen's looking at about 40 acres, because what we're looking at is it needs to be far enough away to where we're not on, the incoming path of an airport or something like.
Yeah.
We want to have it to where when you're out there, you don't know that there's a city 10 miles away because you're out here to focus. And by the way, Jeff, that whole 30 days, there's no electronics. There's no media. There's no nothing. There's you, me, and Jesus. And that's
it's a 30-day detox from, all of the distractions of life.
Right. And when your family has that as well, because the family has to agree in advance to be a part of this, because, you're only investing in the rest of your life. That's all. And, this was Helen's answered prayer, because she saw me go to weekend retreat after daily conference to God knows whatever. And I'd come back on this camp high, and you know how it is. You come back and you're like, hey, I learned all this stuff. And they're like, that's great. You're a jerk on Friday. What else you got for me? And that's real, though. That's reality. And
sure.
And a lot of guys, they don't want to talk about that, but guys, you may be part of the problem. Hate to tell you,
Right. I ask you about military outreach ministry, about Warfighter Ranch, because I want to use this to wrap the episode up. I'm going to invite somebody who's listening right now who has 40 acres of land and would be willing to donate it. You now work you have a 501c3 already. Is that right?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this episode and you have 40 acres of land and you'd be willing to donate it for a tax write-off, I want you to reach out to us. I'm going to get them in touch with you, Ron. And who knows, maybe somebody's listening to this episode right now that says, I believe in what you're trying to do, and I'll give you the 40 acres of land to do it with. Ron, people are, hopefully many of them are inspired. I hope that one or two people that were literally at the brink of taking in their own life, their life was changed and was saved today because of this episode.
I pray, Joe.
But for a lot of people, maybe they want to know more. So how do they find out more about you?
Well, they can find us at warfighterranch.org, which is our website. And we're still working on the website a little. My web skills are not, that's not my strong suit, Jeff.
Yeah, you and me both. Yep.
You give me a rifle and we'll go to work. But you put me in front of the computer and I'm handicapped pretty much.
Right.
But you can find us at Warfighter Ranch and Isaiah 6:8 Actual, Isaiah number 6, number 8 Actual on all platforms. And our YouTube channel has over 800 family-friendly videos. My grandbabies can watch them. All sorts of topics for the veteran and first responder community.
All right. Yeah. Hey, we're going to put links to all of those things that you just heard Ron talk about. So if you're driving right now, you can always just check out the notes to this and see the links to it. Ron, thank you for being so real on this episode. Thanks for being willing to go into those hard moments at home growing up, or in combat, or in the room with the door locked and a pistol in your mouth. And man, I am proud to see the way that you're serving veterans and their families now. Thanks for being on this show with me.
Thank you so much, Jeff. God bless you, brother.
Yeah, blessings to you, man. I really hope that somebody was listening to this episode that is at the low point in life. And maybe you're right now where Ron was when he was locked in the room and not sure that he wanted to see tomorrow. I hope this was the episode that causes you to reach out and find somebody that's willing to help. See, the truth is, if you're going to be unbeatable, you will unfortunately go through some miserable, some incredibly painful things in life, like Ron did. But if you're actually going to be unbeatable, you will find a way to reach out and to let others come around you that will help you get through these hard times. I hope you heard something today that gave you the hope to hang on for one more day. Ron, thank you for being so open, so honest with us. And to the folks that are regularly watching this thing on YouTube or subscribing to our podcast on your favorite podcast channel, thank you for staying connected. If you're not already a subscriber, why don't you go ahead and hit subscribe however you watch or listen to the Unbeatable Podcast. But I also want to say thanks to the people that stay connected with us all week long. Not just on one weekly episode, but I'm talking about the folks that are connected on social media. If you're looking for us out there, just simply search for @Unbeatable Podcast. I want to say thanks for the amazing fans, like our fan of the week this week, Brian Toth. Brian, we think you're awesome. We think you're so awesome. We want everybody else to know how awesome you are. That's why we've made you the fan of the week this week. Hey guys, if you're really, really struggling and you're not sure how to handle what you're going through, you have no idea how you're going to make it through 2024, I developed this little motivational video. I did it for people going through the most difficult training in the military, people that are going through some of the most difficult circumstances in life. And if you want that video, I'll send you the link totally free. All you have to do is just join the Unbeatable Army. It is a completely free list where we'll send you content directly to your inbox each week. Go over to unbeatablearmy.com, join the list, and we'll send you that video for free. And I hope to see you right back here when I bring another amazing guest to you next week. God bless.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.